Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Planning Committee of the 7th of July 2026. I'm Councillor Phil Murphy, and Dale.
Hello there, I'm Councillor Dale Rook, and I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Thank you, Dale. And officers.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Andrew Jones, Head of Planning.
I'm Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager.
Joanne Chase, Solicitor to the Planning Committee.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Thanks for that. It's still fairly warm in here despite the air conditioning, so if anybody, you've all got your jackets off, anybody I can see, but if anybody else wants to take their jackets off, feel free to do so. Right, go to the agenda, and do we have any apologies for absence, Richard?
None received, Chair.
Okay, and any declarations of interest? No? Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can somebody... thank you, Sue, and Marion, thank you very much. So we can now go to the agenda as regards the applications before us, and I propose to take item 4.4 first, and then we'll go to 4.5, both of which have got public speaking, and then we'll go back to the original agenda. 4.4 is application DM 2026 0024. The change of use of the existing building from office use Class B1 to a Class D1 designation, and that's being presented by Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone in attendance here and online also. So hopefully we can all see the slides, the presentation slides. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so as the Chair said, this is a full application for the material change of use of the ground floor only of a building in the centre of the town of Usk, going from use class B1 to D1. And in this instance, within that use class, this relates to a day nursery. And to confirm, in terms of the remit of the application, no external works to the building are proposed or seeking planning permission. And I think it's important at the outset, members, to remind ourselves that the consideration of this application is on land use planning matters only. There's been reference within correspondence received in connection with this application to Care Inspectorate Wales, or CIW, which is the independent regulator of social care and childcare services in Wales. Matters relating to child safeguarding, staffing ratios, operational management, and the suitability of facilities are regulated by CIW through a separate regime and are not material planning considerations. So to confirm, the reason this application is presented to you this afternoon, members, as Planning Committee, is due not only to the requests of one of the ward members, but it has exceeded the threshold of 5 households submitting objections to it. And so whilst a number of you as members were on site yesterday, for the benefit of those that weren't and anyone also watching in this afternoon, I'll just talk you through the site photographs, and in this instance there are only very limited plans as it relates to a material change of use only. So this is the site. Apologies, there's no red line boundary on that image. You obviously, most people will be familiar with Tywyn Square in the centre of the town here in Usk. The building there is labelled, you can see 1 to 4 Tywyn Court. That is the application site centrally. I say apologies, that's not indicated any clearer. So just moving on to the next slide. So I say there's only sort of technical drawing submitted with the application on the basis that say there are no external alterations sought or seeking permission through this application for planning permission. So that's just showing you there the ground floor of the old chapel building. In terms then of some context and photos, so this is the old chapel building. It's located prominently at the entrance to Tywyn Square, and there is a further shot there showing it in a little bit of wider context, particularly with that sort of the highway infrastructure and network around it on its sort of corner plot. And just for reference finally as well, as I've set out, the permission is seeking from B1 use class at ground floor to D1. These are just some images for reference of the previous office use that existed and operated from the site. I think that just takes us on then to a summary of the issue. So, as ever, the Case Officers Committee report provides a detailed assessment of the material planning considerations and policies relevant here. So I'll just provide an overview and pick up on some of the key issues that have emerged during the course of this application process. And as we always do, and as we should start firstly with principle. The site here is located within the centre of the town of Usk. The location is on the edge, but is within the central shopping area, that's designated under LDP policy RET2. And that particular policy sets out that proposals that will safeguard the vitality, attractiveness and viability of these defined areas will be permitted. And given its location within the town centre, officers of the view that the use may encourage linked trips to other nearby shops, services and facilities, and thereby supporting town centre activity, particularly during daytime hours. Strategic Policy S5 also provides some in-principle support. It states that development proposals that provide community facilities will be permitted within town and village development boundaries, subject to detailed planning considerations. And it's that I'll move to next in terms of some of those important key material planning considerations that have been very relevant to this application. First and foremost, that being residential amenity. And just to remind ourselves, criterion D of policy DES 1 in the LDP sets out that development, which includes changes of use, will be required to maintain reasonable levels of privacy and amenity of occupiers of neighbouring properties. And in addition to this, policy EP1 also requires that development should have regard to privacy, amenity and health of occupiers of neighbouring properties. And as you'll have seen, the application has resulted in significant levels of public engagement, and many of which have considered the impact of residential amenity. Indeed, there was 17 representations objecting to the application and 27 representations in support. And I'll pick up now on a key theme that has arisen through the consultation process in respect of residential amenity, and that is noise. So as I said, the lawful use of the ground floor of the building is that of B1 use. And a B1 use includes office, as was the case here previously, research and development, as well as light industry. Permission is sought for a day nursery, which falls within the D1 use class. Officers recognise that the material change of use will result in different activities and uses to the ground floor, which has residential flats above for context and clarification. Accordingly, the application has been subject to detailed engagement with the Council's Environmental Health Department. And as you'll have noted, members in the committee report, further to negotiation with Environmental Health, version 5 of the noise impact assessment has now resulted in their initial objection now being removed, subject to the imposition of planning conditions. The revised details now provide for a proposed sound insulation scheme between the separating floors that would result in a sound reduction of approximately 20 decibels. Further detailed planning considerations are also considered to be appropriate to mitigate impact on residential amenity. These include securing the installation of the noise reduction works, submission of a noise management plan, as well as a condition to restrict the hours of use to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. Therefore, officers' advice to you members is that the development is considered to accord with relevant criteria within policies DES 1 and EP1, and that the use of planning conditions would mitigate against any additional impact the use may have. Turning next to another key issue that's been taken from the well-engaged consultation exercise, and that is highways and transport. As we must do in terms of considering transport, first of all, we must look to national planning policy that's set out in Planning Policy Wales Edition 12, which makes it clear that the Welsh Government is committed to reducing reliance on the private car and supporting a modal shift to walking, cycling and public transport. The policy moves on to require that the use of sustainable transport hierarchy in relation to new development, which prioritises walking, cycling and public transport ahead of the private motor vehicle. And as I said, this site is located centrally within the town of Usk. It's within reasonable walking distance from wider residential properties within the community. It is also positioned immediately outside of the bus stop on Two Inn Square. It is reasonable to conclude that the location of the site is considered to be sustainable, providing reasonable alternatives to the private motor vehicle. However, in respect of car-based travel, officers certainly acknowledge that there have been a number of local residents raising concerns with general highway and parking safety concern, with particular relevance to drop-offs and pickups to the application site. You will have seen, members, in late correspondence, a suite of photographs provided by one of the ward members, and these illustrate a number of vehicles, including cars, vans, and delivery lorries parked at various locations across Two Inn Square. However, these are not dated or times, and neither is it clear what building or land use they were visiting on the square or indeed within the wider town. Whilst they do show isolated incidents of inconsiderate parking, this is a matter for the Council's civil enforcement team. Officers' advice to members is that whilst these provide a degree of context, limited weight can be afforded to them. We must consider the proposal and whether it meets the detailed requirements of Policy MV1 of the adopted LDP. And this really is the crux of the consideration of this application in respect of highway safety. And for us to consider, would the change of use of the ground floor of the old chapel from a B1 use to a D1 use nursery create significant and unacceptable additional traffic growth in relation to the capacity of the existing road network, and or would it fail to provide a safe and easy access for road users? And context is key to our consideration of this, and indeed to your consideration of this, members. As one might expect, in the centre of a town, there is a variety of land uses in the immediate proximity, and these include residential, retail, offices, and public houses. Off-street parking for these surrounding uses is limited, given the nature of Usk being an historic market town. To that point, the previous B1 use was also not served by on-site parking. Other commercial and residential uses within the wider central shopping area, including Two Inn Square and Bridge Street, therefore rely upon parking in Usk's public car parks, on side streets, subject to any relevant parking restrictions. And this key consideration of context is relevant and reflected in the view that the Council's highways engineer has provided in their response as statutory consultee to the application, and as you have noted, they offer no objection to the application on highway safety grounds. In summary on this matter, whilst officers recognise that there are documented occurrences of inconsiderate parking on Two Inn Square, we are not of the view that the proposed change of use of the ground floor of the former chapel from B1 to D1 would not create significant and unacceptable additional traffic growth in relation to the capacity of the existing highway network. In respect of whether it would fail to provide a safe and easy access for road users, when considered in the context of the lawful use of the building, again, officers are not of the view that such harm would be increased as a result of the change of use from B1 to D1. So, in conclusion, as officers we fully understand that as a result of the consultation exercise, local concerns and voices have been voiced very clearly. These include, but are not limited to, highway safety, and harm to residential amenity, particularly noise, as discussed. As officers, we've worked very closely with colleagues in both highways and environmental health to consider the impact of the material change of use of the ground floor of this building. Their advice to statutory consultees has therefore been given the appropriate weight in the exercise of planning balance. Our advice is that there are no material planning reasons or planning policy conflict on which to withhold the granting of planning permission. The development is therefore presented to this afternoon members with a recommendation for approval, subject to the detailed conditions that are set out in the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And before I bring in the local member, can I confirm that everybody has seen the late correspondence, not just the written, but the photographs and everything as well? Yeah, okay. Can I remind everybody that you can only vote on the equipment? Press the long button, and when it goes red, you can talk. That applies to everybody online. And don't forget to click list after voting. The next person to address us is Councillor Tony Keir, one of the ward members. Councillor Howells is part of the committee, and he'll have his opportunity of discussing it with the rest of us. Councillor Keir, you have 4 minutes, and you can sum up it at the end of the debate with a further 2 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I firstly put on record that I chair USC Business Group, but I don't believe there is a conflict of interest in this matter. As an elected representative for the residents most directly affected here, I have assessed the documents submitted, and now I'm formally opposing the application and urge members to do so also. My principal planning-related objections are twofold, and indeed have been just widely discussed: highways and loss of amenity. The relevant and key matters are that Chewin Square is a busy thoroughfare with MCC consultants saying around 80% of its area is given up to highways. It is the drop-off area and transport hub for the school children as well as public bus services. Designed in the 1960s, it is not well suited for modern usage, and congestion occurs at peak times. We see delivery vehicles having to park on double yellow lines and the central cobbled areas. Pavement parking and the current abuse of double yellow line parking and cobbled areas parking are constant daily issues, and the lack of enforcement is a major concern expressed to me as a ward member, and I'm sure Councillor Howells. The slides ironically just presented show vehicles parked illegally by the site. The main car park in the square is pretty much full every day from residents and long-term day parking. The Maryport North car park is heavily utilised by shoppers, residents and workers in Usk. Trying to find a place to park can be an issue. It is not in reality a practical drop-off area, which is in contrast to the long-stay nature of the office workers previously used the site. Usk Primary School and others across Monmouthshire, we all know, see parents stopping as close to the educational outlet as possible, especially when delayed or in bad weather. The building is on a bend with double yellow lines there for a safety reason. The transport management plan, in my view, won't work in practice, nor would be supported by MCC enforcement officers because of the lack of presence we see already. So 24 places could mean 24 drop-offs and 24 pickups, and would potentially lead to more danger in the highway. This, I believe, contravenes policy MV1 of the LDP. The loss of amenity, I am deeply troubled by this and the contravention of EP1, which should ensure any development does not result in unacceptable impacts through noise and disturbances. The change of use does, in my opinion, clearly have an unacceptable impact and blight the lives of the residents who have bought and rented for many years based on the current office use, and accepted that comparisons to office and nursery use are not the proverbial apples with apples. The residents' lived experiences, concerns and upsets since March are very relevant, as expressed to members who visited the site on Monday. May I thank the health officer for the detailed work here, the site visit and the recording equipment installed following my representation on behalf of the residents, and indeed meeting the residents. The reports presented here and detailed. I don't have time to summarise everything. However, I would like to highlight 3 issues. Firstly, the lack of monitoring that has taken place to come to the conclusion to make a recommendation, primarily because the service is being trialled at the moment and does not and cannot reflect the noise impact that will occur upon 24 ALN children, plus 6 staff and 1 manager. Secondly, the noise projections are based on a non-comparable, and I understand to be a new build site in London, not a 200-year-old church conversion. And they're also considered skewed as they are based on a timeline of 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. and not
30 minutes.
The future, therefore, is unacceptable for residents. My view here, members, is that I am not persuaded by the officer's report recommendations to approve this application. And it also appears at odds to me for officers to restrict use of the site because of the loss of amenities, but not to apply that same argument to the whole site. I highlight to members that highway safety and loss of amenity are very relevant, strong and sufficient planning grounds to reject the conclusion recommending approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. There were several points there that you might want to pick up, Andrew, or Hugh Owen is on the line. Is it worth him giving us some answers on the sound provision?
Yeah, we could see if Hugh Owen is available. I mean, I think the point, there's a lot of points made there, absolutely. Some of them sort of overlap on the sort of certainly the 2 key elements that I've discussed in my presentation. I think from an officer level, a point perhaps would be useful if Hugh is able to come in is Councillor Keir has raised some concerns in respect of the noise modelling and work that's been done to inform that survey work. As a technical piece of work, that might be more appropriate if Hugh is available to come in and provide his view on his professional judgment of that document and his considerations of it in informing us as officers and yourself as members. And there is Hugh.
He's just come in. So, Hugh, there were particular concerns there about the modelling, and but the inference was that although there's been modelling taken place up to now, it wouldn't be adequate in terms of a full complement. So if you could deal with that matter, we'd be grateful.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's not uncommon for noise impact assessments to base for reports on modelling. Ideally measurements are always best, but we certainly do regularly see noise impact assessments with modelled assessments, and we generally accept those, although obviously we do scrutinise them very, very carefully. I'm not the case officer that has been heavily involved in this case, but I am familiar with the noise impact assessments that have been submitted. Key from environmental health's point of view is the final sound insulation scheme, which has been submitted, and in our opinion will result in substantively improving the sound insulation between the proposed nursery and the residential use. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
Thank you, Hugh. If you can hang around just in case anything crops up with the members. I've got nobody from the town and community council, although I note the objection from us town council. We've got nobody registered to speak as an objector or as supporter. So we'll go now to members, and Councillor Bromfield.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon, everybody. So having carefully considered this application, I am unable to support the officer's recommendation of approval. My concerns are not about the need for childcare provision within Monmouthshire. We absolutely need high quality nursery provision in the county. But my concerns are around whether this site is suitable for this use. In my view, the proposal raises significant concerns regarding the principle of development, highway safety, loss of residential amenity and safeguarding. Firstly, on the principle of development, every planning application must demonstrate the proposed use is appropriate for its location and that it can operate without causing unacceptable impacts on neighbouring occupiers or the wider area. Policies DES1 and EP1 of the Local Development Plan requires development to respect its surroundings and protect the amenity of neighbouring residents. From reading the documents associated with this application and the officer's report, I am not convinced this proposal satisfies those requirements. The building is located within a mixed-use area with residential flats sharing the site. Introducing a nursery into this environment will inevitably result in regular arrivals and departures, outdoor activity, servicing and deliveries. While each of these may appear limited when considering individually, together they represent a very different pattern of activity from the previous office use. I am also concerned about the lack of clarity around the current use of the site. The officer's report refers to environmental health, being advised that there has been some limited nursery or home educational use on the ground floor. And the local member representation also raises concerns that internal works may have commenced. However, the application is not described in the report as retrospective, nor is there any clear explanation of whether the nursery use has already begun, whether it's lawful, or what weight members should give to this, in my view. The lack of clarity is concerning, as members should be fully informed. My second concern relates to highways, and I believe this is one of the most significant issues before us. Policy MV1 of the LDP is clear that development should not prejudice highway safety or create unacceptable traffic conditions. My concerns regarding highway safety extend beyond the absence of on-site parking. The application relies on staff and parents using existing public car parks within Usk Town Centre and beyond. However, these car parks already experience high levels of demand, particularly around busy periods. This proposal therefore places additional reliance on parking provision that is already under pressure. While I note that the Highway Authority has raised no objections, this appears to be on the basis that waiting restrictions, including double yellow lines, are already in place. In reality, illegal parking in the surrounding area is an existing issue, and from my understanding, enforcement is extremely limited. This is not speculation, but lived experience by residents and users of Usk every day. I'm therefore not persuaded that simply relying on existing restrictions provides sufficient assurance the highway safety will not be adversely affected, nor have I seen any commitment to additional monitoring or enforcement should parking pressures increase once the nursery becomes fully operational. Furthermore, I understand that children attending the nursery will be required to bring their own food, and that food preparation will not take place on site. However, that does not remove the need for servicing. The day-to-day operation of a nursery will still require deliveries of cleaning materials, equipment, and waste collections. I have not seen clear evidence of where those vehicles will safely stop or unload without adding further pressure to an already constrained highway environment. In my view, this has not been adequately assessed. Turning to residential amenity, policy EP1 seeks to ensure that development does not result in unacceptable impacts through noise and disturbance. A nursery by nature is a lively environment. Children playing and learning is entirely normal, and no one would suggest otherwise. However, our role as a planning committee is not to decide whether children should play or learn, but whether this particular site is appropriate for that use without causing unacceptable harm to neighbouring residents. The Environmental Health Officer considered the acoustic information, but also acknowledges that the assessment is based on limited monitoring. More concerningly, the advice indicates that should the actual noise level exceed these predicted, once the nursery is fully operational, there may be limited scope for the council to resolve those impacts through enforcement. To me, that is a significant consideration. If we are being advised that enforcement may not provide an effective solution after permission has been granted, then we should be confident now that neighbouring residents will not suffer unacceptable impacts. I do not believe that confidence has been demonstrated. I disagree with the officer's recommendation for approval on these grounds. My final concern is safeguarding and site suitability. The proposal relies on shared access serving both residential flats and a children's nursery. This raises questions about the interaction between residents, visitors, deliveries, and families arriving with young children throughout the day. While safeguarding is primarily governed through children's legislation, the layout and design of a development are material planning considerations. Good planning should seek to minimise unnecessary conflicts between different users of a site. I am not persuaded that the implications of this shared access arrangement have been fully assessed or that sufficient weight has been given to the practical operation of the site. Chair, these concerns should not be viewed in isolation. They are cumulative. Taken together, they raise genuine questions about whether this building can accommodate a nursery without creating unacceptable impacts on highway safety, residential amenity, and the safe operation of the site. The need for childcare is not in dispute. However, every planning decision must be based on whether the proposed use is appropriate in its specific location and whether it complies with the policies of our local development plan. In my view, it does not. For these reasons, I cannot support the officer's recommendation, and I will be voting against this application today.
Thank you, Councillor Bromfield. Andrew, do you want to pick up any of the points? Or wait.
No, I'll come back in now. And thank you, Councillor Bromfield, for raising and touching upon some of the issues we've discussed. I mean, there's certainly a clear pattern of the issues and some differing views on those. I think I'll just start quickly with the commencement of use. I think the question was what weight to apply to that on a retrospective basis. The officer's view is that a use has commenced here. However, in terms of what weight we must give to that as members of planning committee, well, my suggestion would be no weight. A retrospective planning application should be considered in exactly the same way, be partly or fully retrospective, as a proposed planning application. Planning process, planning system allows for such applications to be made, and all applications, be it proposed or retrospectively, should be considered on material planning issues and relevant planning policies. The fact that something is retrospective should bear no weight to you in your assessment of this, or any proposal. In terms of, I'll also try and take them through this, in terms of some of the highway matters and the concerns raised in terms of reference to policy MV1, effectively all uses in Usk town centre are reliant on public car parks and parking, where there's restrictions on side streets. This use is not isolated in that instance. Residents, commercial operators, as I've said in my presentation, be it shops, retail, offices, or indeed a number of A3 and public house uses, are all dealing with that in the same way. This use is not isolated. There is an inference that this would create an increased demand. I think the officer view is that it simply provides a different demand. It is a materially different use class. Office hours bring perhaps more structured patterns of movement than a nursery would, but fundamentally the building is governed by its size and other issues that dictate its capacity, and we feel that this is simply different movements, different patterns, rather than fundamentally increasing pressure on the highway capacity to a point where there would be grounds on which to withhold planning permission. And those parking pressures relating to bringing in, as was noted on site yesterday, children will bring their own lunch, but there would still be deliveries for cleaning and stock in exactly the same way that the existing B1 use would have to provide deliveries for stock of cleaning products of office utensils, for example. All of those deliveries and all those uses on Tewin Square and beyond in the centre of Usk are in the same position. Would this use class provide such unacceptable additional need and demands than any of those other uses? And that's the balance of what we need to consider as to whether the material change of use would do that. And our view as officers, and like I said, that's borne out on this particular point in our colleagues in Highways' view, is that those needs that has been identified by Councillor Bromfield would be no different to the extant use of the site. In terms of some of the other matters that were raised, and in terms of outdoor activity, there is no space for outdoor activities here that would give rise to noise issues there. They would need to be done off-site. Usk does have playing space available publicly for children to be taken to. So I'm not sure I can say much more on that point. In terms of, I would say, safeguarding, that's been raised by Councillor Bromfield. I think that does loop back to the point I made at the outset of this discussion in terms of the role of the Care Inspectorate Wales has and planning issues. Land uses, changes of use will always involve adults and children interacting to some extent. Some of the comments made here and those safeguarding concerns and how that's managed, I do feel, members, I would advise you that is an issue that would be a matter for the Care Inspectorate Wales and not one that sits before the land use and change of land use here that's before us to make a decision on as to whether or not that land use change is acceptable. Hopefully I've covered all of the points Councillor Bromfield's raised, but I'll certainly come back if I haven't. Oh, sorry, I think, just turn my page, there are some further comments. In terms of amenity and the impact suggested, I think that's why we've advocated a condition for mitigation. We're acknowledging as a land use there may be impact, but planning guidance and planning legislation is very clear. If you can identify an impact, can that impact be mitigated and managed through appropriate planning conditions? That's looping back to the planning circular on conditions and how they should be used. And in this instance, yes, we're acknowledging that there's a different land use, there's the potential for an impact. But we feel, and I think Hugh has hopefully explained there in his professional assessment of what's before us in terms of information, that can be mitigated, and the wording of the condition is such that it would safeguard that. The noise management plan also has an element of flexibility that could be reviewed. So it's not a case of one and done. So I think I've covered everything there that Councillor Bromfield has. I do agree with her point that we need to look at everything in the whole, and that's a really key point. We need to look at this application in the whole, weighing up all of these material planning considerations as to whether or not we feel there is sufficient planning harm and sufficient evidence that there's evidence that's contrary to planning policy to such extent that we can withhold planning permission. And I think we're clear in our advice to you as members, but that's for you to arrive at your own decision.
Thank you, Andrew. And next to speak is Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. I find this application really rather troubling. I have deep concern for the residents who already live in the building, in the upper floor, and the huge change and disadvantage they are going to be put through if we approve this application. I think it's an unacceptable detriment to the existing residents. I find it extremely difficult to agree with the officer assessment that dropping children off for a nursery school is the same as an office-based premises where you go and park and you're there for the day. It is completely obvious that parents will try and get as close as possible to the premises to drop their children off. They're often under great pressure, understandably. Parents work. They can't spend half an hour finding a parking place in a car park some way away, walking their children to the nursery and then walking back again is just, it's not the way that human nature behaves. And I think it's unacceptable. That position in Tuan Square it's so difficult to find a parking place. We've all done it. We know it well. And although I wasn't on the site visit, I went particularly to look yesterday afterwards, and with a view to being a resident and also local businesses there. And I just genuinely cannot see how you can equate it with a business premises. It's not the same. I also have serious concerns about the noise disturbance. I know there are a lot of very clever systems for noise mitigation, and obviously the Environmental Health Department seem perfectly satisfied. But I'm not convinced that the trial run, which is already being run, is sufficient for us to determine that. I think there are serious concerns about highways. I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous for the children, and I think it's an unacceptable burden on residents and businesses in the area. And as I said, I have great concern about the existing residents, and I certainly cannot support it, and I will be voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. I don't think there was anything in there that we haven't brought up before.
No, the points are consistent with discussion. I think what I would just quickly clarify is that I don't think as officers we're saying everything is the same. They are, and one of the principles is we're acknowledging it's different. It's materially a different use class. The impacts and the way the building we use is different. I've already acknowledged that. Visitor interaction and points are different in terms of times of the day, office versus nursery. We're accepting they are different. Say that's part and parcel of them being in different use classes. But our position is that they're not increasing to an unacceptable level, and that we're not comparing directly like for like. It's just there is an impact. It's a different impact, but it's one. There's our that can be mitigated.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And Councillor McKenna. You're on mute, Jane.
There we go. Hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew, for the presentation. I take on board what you've said about noise and the mitigations in place for that. I take on board what you've said about safeguarding, and that's with CIW, although I do have safeguarding concerns, but this isn't obviously the place to air those. So my concerns with regard to planning issues around the highway safety concerns, many of which have been mentioned. Now I visit Usk on a daily basis, often twice a day. I'm very, very familiar with Twin Square and with that junction. I consider it to be a very difficult junction to get out of. I therefore don't think it's a very safe junction, and obviously the premises that we're looking at is located right on that junction on the corner. I note that you mentioned about, with regards to parking, that there's civil enforcement team that can go to Usk. And the whole time that I've been going to Usk, I've never seen a civil enforcement team there. Therefore, in my view, the parking with these additional vehicles is only going to get worse. The restricted times are between 8 and 6, Monday to Friday. They're obviously known to be the busiest times during the day. That's rush hour. Granted, school might start 8 till 9. Again, that's busiest time, but afternoon may be slightly more staggered if the school nursery finishes at 3 or 4 or 5. So therefore, I think the traffic growth is going to get worse, and it's going to be worse at those peak times with 24 pupils plus staff plus deliveries. It's potentially 30 vehicles in the morning, 30 vehicles in an evening. That's up to 60 vehicles, if not more, during the daytime. To me, that is an increase in traffic growth. You mentioned about has to be safe and easy access for users. I don't believe that there is safe and easy access for users. We have to really think this. We're not talking about adults here. These are children. They're not only children, but they're children with additional learning needs. I've got a resident in my ward. Her son has got additional learning needs. She doesn't live next to a particularly busy road, but she is absolutely paranoid because her son with the additional learning needs tends to try to get out of the house or the garden and run towards the road. And these are the sort of issues that we are potentially dealing with these sort of users that will be accessing this site. I know that you mentioned car parks. Some of these children might be coming from outside of county or from different parts of the county. Therefore, it's not likely that it's going to be their parents or guardians that are dropping them off. And it could be that it's taxi drivers. Are we realistically saying that we're going to expect a taxi driver to park down in what I call the co-op car park? Because you can never get into the Twin Square car park for love nor money. Are we realistically saying that it's going to be safe for them to take children with additional learning needs up that narrow high street? If we've walked that high street, we will know, and I've done it many times with my children, I am petrified because although it's a 20-mile-per-hour road now, the vehicles do come through there faster at times, and you get some large vehicles that come through that, and I do not deem it safe, and that is a safe thing to expect a taxi driver to do. I know that you mentioned the previous B1 use was for office, but again, we're talking about adults there. We can't compare. Again, I know that you mentioned about other businesses that are used there and they have to use car parks, etc. But again, primarily the people that are going to use those businesses are adults. So therefore, based on my local knowledge of that junction and that property, I can't support this. As a councillor, I have to take the safety of those children into consideration. And I know there could be slightly cross wires there with regards to safeguarding, but primarily this is about my concerns with highways. And one question just to finish off, why is it called a nursery? Because I believe that the children are up to 12 years old. And will there be any implications going forward if this was to get passed? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. Andrew, do you want to pick up a point?
Yeah, we are considering this as a D1 nursery, and in terms of the age of and how it operates, we feel it in a land use sense it would be a nursery. The age of the children, be it the start age or ending age, I think wouldn't be looking to sort of, if members were minded to approve, to sort of impose conditions on age of children, etc. In terms of how it operates and functions, from the details that have been submitted, we very much see that as being a D1 nursery use. So looking at it in very clear, contextualised planning land use terms, that's how we've considered it, and that's the basis we've assessed it against policies, as have our consultees.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Pym.
Diolch, Chair. My question is regarding a condition, if I may. The condition is that the noise management plan shall be reviewed and, where necessary, updated in the event of complaints of noise disturbance from nearby properties or at the request of the local authority, with any revisions to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. My query was, what might this sort of review look like? Because obviously this is something that the residents are going to be looking closely at if this gets approved today. And my second question was just whether whether there's any cycle parking in Twin Square. I've not noticed any prior. So, diolch.
Thanks, Councillor Bryn. In terms of what that would look like, that would be our request to invite an additional application to discharge the condition for an updated management plan to be submitted, and for that to go through an updated discharge of condition application process that would enable consultation with Environment Health, and indeed, given the context, with neighbours as well. So if we were minded to invite that, that would be the process and framework on which that condition would be revisited. I'll just get the wording of the condition in front of me now.
Councillor Quinn, can you repeat that out once your light goes red? Because we didn't hear you. Press it. Wait for it to go red. Right.
Sorry, I asked if it could please be repeated in layman's terms. Apologies.
Okay, so apologies and apologies to anyone else if I've spoken in planning jargon there. Certainly that's certainly not my intent, and this is supposed to be a meeting that's accessible for all to understand. So my apologies if that's caused any confusion to members or indeed any watching members of the public. Details are required as the condition stands that within 2 months a noise management plan is submitted to us. That is submitted. That plan is submitted as a discharge of condition planning application, and that's submitted to us, and we consult where necessary with colleagues or any parties that we identify that need to be considered on that management plan. Once the details are agreed, that is approved and the condition is discharged. The flexibility of this condition means that on the scenarios that are set out in the condition, that being if there are event of complaints of noise or at our request as the local planning authority, we have the right to invite a submission of an updated noise management plan that we can reconsider, and that condition can be subsequently discharged again. And again, that process can involve and would involve consultation with environmental health, and as I've said, certainly given the context with residents as well, as it's pertinent to noise. So it's the flexibility that we, in those situations that are identified, we can come back and look at it rather than it's agreed once and that's it, then it's forever binding to that. So if that's hopefully addressed that query.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for bringing this to us. I feel that this proposal does represent a material change for the residents. There are 5 residents, I believe, who, when they bought this property, beneath them was an office space being used. I think the material change for residents is the increased noise input, and that constitutes a loss of amenity to them, and I think that's an unacceptable harm for the residents. And I'm not persuaded by the mitigation argument either. A sound reduction of 20 decibels I think is unachievable because it doesn't take into account if windows are being opened, as they are likely to be for ventilation. You know, this is quite an old building, and I would expect windows both upstairs and downstairs to be regularly opened for ventilation summer and winter. So I'm not persuaded by this at all, and I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I'll try and keep this brief because we're all talking about the same things. Coming as the ward I represent has, similar to us, streets that were designed before everybody owned a car, and so that the business and it has a school in its midst. So I'm more than aware of the of what happens at school chucking out time or school entry time. But nothing I've seen suggests this is any less workable than the situation in my ward, which is by and large workable, and it's a nuisance and it irritates people. But I think that's, and I would go with highways on that front. These are the two things: traffic and noise. The noise bit does concern me. And it might be I don't know what 30 decibels is. I mean, there was a lot of, when we were standing there yesterday, there was in fact an enormous amount of traffic noise, which is a constant rather than something which comes and goes. But it's quite a noisy place already. I don't know what 30 decibels sounds like, and perhaps you can advise us on what a difference that makes. And also, he used the words modelling we've been talking about monitoring, and obviously monitoring half a dozen children is different from monitoring 24 children or young people. But he used the word modelling, so I'd like to hear about the technicalities of that. Did they model what the difference would make with that, with the maximum number of children? And then my other concern, and that has already been mentioned, is that we'd have to take that on face value rather than after the event. So I'm encouraged by the fact that we could go back and revisit the noise thing. I think that's the major concern. It certainly is for me in terms of amenity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. And Hugh, are you still with us? Can you just deal with those couple of points? What does 30 decibels sound like? And I'm sure you heard what Councillor McConnell said.
Yes, Chair, certainly. Hopefully you can hear me okay. What does 30 decibels sound like? I suppose the councillor is referring to the monitoring that we undertook from a resident's property, and identified noise up to 30 decibels coming from a ground floor level. It's probably akin to normal conversation, or sorry, less than normal conversation levels. It would be noise that could be audible in the background. When I should explain, we never get to a scenario where you install noise monitoring equipment in the property and it monitors at 0 decibels. There's always noise in the property. So for example, if we installed our noise monitoring equipment in the committee room today and it was total silence in there, our monitoring equipment would still register a level of around about 18, 19 decibels. So there's always a bottom floor of around about 18, 19 decibels. 30 decibels is substantive and impactive, which is why we raised further concerns with the applicant and recommended that a sound insulation scheme needed to be undertaken to give us a safety net, and that's what the acoustic consultant came back and then provided a substantive sound insulation to improve a sound insulation value of the floor by a further 20 decibels, increasing what we modelled, what we predicted, bearing in mind the current makeup of the floor from around about 43 decibels sound insulation to 64 decibels sound insulation barrier between the ground floor and the first floor use. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Councillor.
It sounds like it, you go.
So my other question was, so it was modelled on the likely noise in the future rather than the current noise at the moment. That was another bit of my question.
Can you help with that, Hugh?
Yes, certainly. As I indicated earlier, it's common with these noise impact assessment reports that the acoustic consultant starts by taking some background noise measurements externally in the area, which indeed they did in this case, and then try and predict the noise impact on nearby residential receptors, and they do that through modelling and based on looking at the sound insulation values of and the proximity of the nearby properties, and a whole host of other factors are taken into account. And we scrutinise these reports very, very carefully. And as Andrew indicated earlier, or advised earlier, the most recent was version 5. Yeah, again, we consider the reports very, very carefully, and the modelling that was provided by the acoustic consultant.
Thanks, Hugh. Councillor Hells.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. Forgive me if some of my concerns have already been covered by my fellow councillors. I'm speaking today as both a joint ward member with Councillor Keir and a member of this planning committee, but most importantly, I'm here to represent the concerns raised by our local residents. To be clear, I have no objection whatsoever to childcare provision. High quality childcare is vital for families and communities. The issue before us is not whether nurseries are important, but whether this particular building is the right location. My primary concern is the impact on residents living in and around the building. The application relates to the ground floor of the former chapel, with residential flats directly above. The council's own environmental health assessment found that the nursery-style noise was audible within the residential accommodation. While mitigation is welcome, the measures that have been proposed in the report still acknowledges that some nursery noise may remain perceptible to residents. That is significant. Residents moved into these properties with the expectation that the ground floor would continue in a business use broadly compatible with residential occupation. They could not reasonably have anticipated a nursery operating directly beneath their homes. The concern is not the children themselves. Children playing, learning and interacting will naturally generate noise, and that is entirely appropriate in the right setting. The concern is whether this building is suitable for that activity, given the impact on those living above, who are entitled to enjoy a reasonable level of peace and quiet in their homes. I'm also concerned that the recommendation relies heavily on conditions, future testing and management plans. Conditions are an important planning tool, but they cannot change the fundamental characteristics of a building. If mitigation measures prove ineffective, it is the residents who will live with that consequences every day. My second major concern relates to the traffic and parking. The proposal provides no dedicated parking for up to 6 staff and no on-site facilities for dropping off or collecting up to 24 children. Twin Square already experiences considerable parking pressures. There are only 27 spaces in the square, and during morning and afternoon peak periods, those spaces are heavily used by residents, school coaches, feeder minibuses, parents dropping off for the school coaches, delivery vehicles and customers of local businesses. Adding nursery-related vehicles movements at the busiest time of day risks placing further strain and safety risks on an already constrained area. As the local joint county councillor, I know only too well how challenging parking can be throughout the whole of Usk, let alone in the square. Residents, businesses and visitors experience these issues daily. While highways officers have raised no formal objection, local knowledge and lived experience are also important considerations and should not be overlooked. There is also the wider point I feel duty-bound to raise on behalf of the community. There are 2 existing nurseries, both of whom have expressed concerns about additional provision. They operate from established premises, provide outdoor facilities, and have invested significantly in serving local families. Importantly, this application is not driven by an absence of childcare provision. Existing providers are already meeting local needs. I fully accept that planning decisions should not favour one business over another. However, it's entirely reasonable to ask whether another nursery is the most appropriate use for the building when suitable childcare facilities already exist, and when this proposal raises legitimate concerns regarding residential amenity, parking pressures, and compatibility with neighbouring uses. Ultimately, planning decisions must be based on the balance of impacts. In this case, I believe there remains a real risk of ongoing conflict between the proposed nursery use and the residents living above. The environmental health assessment itself anticipates some level of perceptible noise even after mitigation. demonstrating that these concerns are genuine. For me, the key question is not whether a nursery would be beneficial in general, but whether this building is the right location for one. Having read all the comments and listened carefully to the residents, I do not believe this is. For those reasons, amenity, parking and compatibility, and in support of my local residents who have engaged with this process, I am unable to support this application and respectfully ask the committee to refuse it. Diolch. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. I doubt that there's any new points in there unless you picked anything up, Andrew.
Just a couple of points, but before I go to that, there's an outstanding point that Councillor Bryn had raised a little while ago now that I wanted to come back to. For her understanding, it raised a fair point. In terms of cycle parking, I'm not aware, and there's plenty of local members here to correct me if I'm wrong, that there's not any cycle parking provision within Two Inns Square. However, within the site boundaries, there is space in front of the railings, etc. But as we know, provision of cycle spaces is not, as it stands, a planning policy requirement to be delivered on this land use. So, no, there isn't a formal provision provided. It's not provided within the square. Apologies, somebody correct me if I got that wrong. But neither is there a planning policy basis for us to make that a requirement or for that to be delivered on site here. So hopefully that, I just wanted to pick that point that Councillor Bryn had raised a little while ago. Just a point to clarify, as Councillor Howells has acknowledged, that a lot of the matters have been discussed already. I needed almost sort of look back and sort of answer the point that I was going to raise in terms of the concerns raised about other local childcare provisions in the town. Competition is not a material planning consideration, so we can't consider that. And I think, yeah, one of the sort of last final point on Councillor Howells' submission there is that, is it the most appropriate use of the building? Was a sort of question and a thought process pondered. That's not the matter before us. Is the use proposed to us an acceptable use? Rather than, are there other more appropriate uses? So just a couple of points of very minor clarification that, say, Councillor Howells had already sort of alluded to in his own submission.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And I've got nobody else down to speak, and I won't take anybody else now. I think we've gone over this enough. Inevitably, there's been a lot of duplication, but I've understood the reason why, and that's why we kept it going. We now got to give the opportunity of Councillor Keir to sum up, and Councillor Keir, you've got 2 minutes before we go to the vote.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, and to the members for your contributions. And I do hope the planning members will give serious weight to the local members' lived experiences and contributions today. I do regret I find myself unable to support Officer's assessment conclusion of the same information and recommendation, particularly in relation to the use of highway parking, public safety and the loss of amenity. This site is simply inappropriate for the proposed use. Full stop. I don't believe the Highways Assessment has adequately considered the requirements of policy MV1, particularly the implications of limited parking provision, the existing volume of vehicles, deliveries, and the misuse of double yellow lines. The illegal parking is not strictly controlled, as the report suggests. That is misleading. The increasing drop-offs and pickups will inevitably lead to more illegal parking, greater congestion, and increased risk to public safety. For context, the photographs were taken last week and during the construction work that was undertaken. My greatest concern, however, is this proposed change of use fails to meet the requirements of EP1 by protecting the amenity of existing residents. In actual fact, I think it will worsen it. There is very limited confidence that future acoustic issues could be effectively enforced or remedied. These residents do not simply live next door to the proposed use, they live within the same building. The activity that is proposed would be directly beneath their homes and in some cases beneath their bedrooms. The evidence from the trial's opening and the noise recorded level suggests that this proposal would fundamentally and detrimentally change the character of their homes. This is already blighting their lives and the upset I have seen firsthand. They should not be in a position where they feel compelled to move, as some have said. Our local development plan and the planning system should be there to protect residents from unacceptable harm, not to leave them worse off. It is the practical application of these plotters, for me, these matters that are personal to me. Would I want 24 children, 6 adults beneath my bedroom? The answer is no.
Can you wind up now, please, Councillor?
Yeah. These are motive issues, but they are grounded in genuine planning concerns, and I ask members to reflect on them alongside the material planning issues I have highlighted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. Any last minute?
No, I think there's no additional points to raise, really. As you said earlier, Chair, this has had a good debate and a good hearing. I think as officers, and I speak as planners, and for highways and environmental health, I think our position is clear from what the answers I've provided and what the report sets out, and have answered the questions that have come forward today. So there's probably not much more I can add to that I think would assist members in making their decision that I've already answered.
Councillor Rook.
Thank you, Chair. I'm of the opinion that we need to follow the officer's recommendations for this. So I'm going to propose that we approve the proposal.
Thank you. You just anticipated my next question to the committee. So is anybody prepared to second Councillor McConnell? In that case, then can we have the yeah, we got the second there. Yeah. Can everybody vote now then, please?
That's all in, Chair. Do you want me to put it on screen?
Yes, please.
So that's been
You're not on. You're not on, Joe. Yeah.
So that's been rejected. So we now go to, does anybody want to put a motion forward to defer to the next meeting for reasons for refusal?
Councillor Howells. I'll second that. Okay.
So we go to a vote now for deferral.
Yeah. So we've got the vote for deferral. Can everybody vote now then, please? If you want to defer it to come back at the next meeting. Got that, Richard?
Just one more vote to come, Chair, but it is conclusive. If you want me to put it out.
Is it close?
No, it is conclusive if you have it.
Yeah, so that's been deferred.
Andrew, do you want to pick up on reasons for refusal?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I mean, I think it's probably very clear from the debate that we've had, but I think for the interest of bringing back some drafted reasons for you next time, members, the reasons that I've understood are twofold, so but please advise if different. One is centred on policy DES 1, EP1 in terms of impact on third-party residential amenity. And the second policy-based reason for refusal. In terms of highway safety, is that on increased use or unsafe movements in terms of pedestrian drop-offs? That would be useful just to clarify, members, if you could, just so that we can make sure that effective use of time to bring back those reasons for you for next time. Is it either an increase in usage, or is it a fundamental safety concern of the drop-off and pick-up situation?
Councillor Howells.
I think that would be both, wouldn't it? Safety and yeah.
All of the above. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we've Councillor Bond, was this relevant? Because we've already taken the vote. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the. Yes, we can have a comfort break. Councillor Bond, what did you want to contribute? No. Okay, we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break then, folks, and we'll resume at 3:25. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming back. We've got to move on now to the item on the agenda regarding DM 2026-00169, which is the retrospective use of the residential curtilage at 8 Waterside, Abergavenny. This is presented by Phil.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just put the presentation up. Bear with me. Wrong way around. So that one. It's that one. There we go. Right. There we go. Okay. So this application relates to an end of link or end of terrace dwelling located in the Park Ward of Abergavenny. The site sits adjacent to the River Gavenny site of interest for nature conservation, the river corridor there, also known as a sink, and that's a local nature conservation designation. There is a group tree preservation order on the opposite side of the river. The site is within the development boundary as identified within the adopted local plan. So retrospective planning application is sought for a change of use from nil use, that is the former riverbank, to residential curtilage and extension of a patio area, which also features a timber structure used to shelter a seating area. So I'll just quickly look at some of the slides. So those are self-explanatory. That's showing the application site, land to the north also owned by the applicant. That's showing the original layout and how that is where the work is, if you like, extended beyond the original curtilage of the property there. And then that shows an extract from, the slide on the right shows an extract from the original planning permission there. Then that's showing the layout of the site with the outbuilding and the sort of patio extended into the bank area there. Those are photos in 2018, so that's a given situation. I don't think we can argue with that. That's whilst it's not got planning permission, it in effect, if a certificate of lawfulness was applied for that work, then we'd be hard pushed to refuse that. And then that's the more recent work which was carried out, as we saw it yesterday on site, for those who were there on the site visit, that was carried out from 2024 onwards, with the patio widened into the riverbank there, and the structure alongside the side of the house there. And then these are pictures that were taken following the storm damage from earlier this year, and you can see that the patio has sort of been undermined really by the washing away, the erosion of the bank during the storms, and that's another similar photo there showing that. And then that's the summary. So in this location, a change of use of the land to residential use in association with the dwelling, 8 Waterside, would normally be considered to be acceptable. However, this is subject to the proposal satisfying relevant material planning considerations. From various aerial photographs and looking at historic applications, it appears that the patios encroached into the River Gavenny bank by roughly 2 to 3 metres. The original patio works that we saw in that earlier photo appear to have taken place more than 10 years ago, but did not encroach onto the banks by the amount we now see today. The patio we see today was laid in 2024 and there's a significant difference in terms of structure and how far it projects compared to the patio that was laid earlier. And the more recent works, as well as the change of use of the land, are considered to require planning permission. LDP policy DES 1 is relevant in this case, and states that all development should be of high quality, sustainable design and respect the local character and distinctiveness of Monmouthshire's built historic and natural environment. The proposal, taking in itself, is simple in design and is typical of what you would see in a domestic garden. There is a structure in the northern part of the garden alongside the house, covering an outdoor seating area, which is, again on its own, an acceptable size, scale and form. The boundary of the patio features metal hand railings for safety reasons. And in general design terms, the proposal is broadly considered to respect the existing form, scale, setting, massing of the housing estate in terms of the requirements of policy DES1 of the adopted LDP. In terms of other considerations, Chapter 6 of Planning Policy Wales highlights that a green infrastructure statement should be submitted with all planning applications and will be proportionate to the scale and nature of the development. The statement, which will need to be informed by a green infrastructure assessment of the site, will describe how green infrastructure will be incorporated into the proposal and how the stepwise approach to protecting biodiversity, habitats and green infrastructure on site will be managed. A stepwise approach considers what impacts may occur as a result of development activity to any identified biodiversity, habitats and GI assets and networks that may be present on or bounding the site. The approach then seeks to manage any harm that may occur by, in terms of the hierarchy, firstly, avoiding any harm, B, minimising, C, mitigating, and restoring as the last resort. The application does not include any detailed green infrastructure statement, and given the amount of riverbank that the patio is extended into, significant GI mitigation restoration will be required to meet the requirements within Chapter 6 of PPW. As per the Biodiversity Officer's comments, and I'd quote, "The harm identified cannot be satisfactorily mitigated through conditions or minor design changes," unquote. The proposal is incapable of being able to comply with the stepwise approach. Following that stepwise approach, impacts on biodiversity must be avoided, minimised, mitigated, and as a last resort, compensated for. Compensation must be of significant magnitude to compensate for loss. The application is not considered to follow the stepwise approach, as said, as the loss of the riverbank habitat has not been compensated for, and therefore the proposal is not considered to adhere to Section 6415 of PPW. The Biodiversity Officer has offered an in-depth response to the consultation, and they've said that the proposal is a retrospective application for an extension of a patio area and wooden shed built on the patio. The unauthorised works have extended 2 to 3 metres from the development line, directly impacting the River Givenny, a sink, designated as a watercourse supporting otters, white-clawed crayfish and priority fish and bird species. The sink designation includes the watercourse and 7 metres from the water's edge. The works have encroached into the sink boundary, and sinks are recognised as key components of ecological networks and are provided protection against development which may harm them in both Planning Policy Wales and the LDP. Development affecting a sink is required to demonstrate that there will be no unacceptable harm, or that such harm is clearly outweighed by overriding public benefit, which has not been demonstrated in this case. The River Givenny is also a tributary of the River Usk, site of special scientific interest and special area of conservation, and which are national designations, and is considered functionally linked habitat supporting those nationally designated sites. The Biodiversity Officer explains the impact the proposal will have on the sink, and they say that the unauthorised works have resulted in the removal of riparian vegetation on the riverbank, leading to the direct loss of habitat that is important for screening and shading the river corridor. Screening is important to minimise disturbance from the residential development on wildlife using that corridor. Shading from bankside vegetation is important in regulating water temperature and supporting aquatic ecology. The local flood authority engineer has also confirmed that the structure is already being undermined, with slumping of ground evident beneath it, as we saw in the photos. This instability increases the risk of siltation and sediment input to the watercourse, as eroded material is washed into the river, with consequent adverse effects on water quality and aquatic habitats. Given the loss of the riparian habitat within the sink buffer and potential impacts on protected and priority species, including by the ongoing instability of the riverbank, the harm identified cannot be satisfactorily mitigated through conditions or minor design changes. The proposal therefore conflicts with national and local policy. Removal of the unauthorised works and restoration of the riverbank would be necessary to remedy the identified harm. The applicant has proposed biodiversity enhancements in the form of bat boxes and bird boxes. These attempt to address the biodiversity net gain policy within PPW. However, it is acknowledged and the biodiversity officer considers that these enhancements would be insufficient considering the amount of GI and ecological features lost at the site. The council's drainage engineers also commented, and these are in quotes, the patio constructed is impinged on the banks of the River Gaveni, which is a main river, and such works are inadvisable as over time they lead to undermining and collapse of the structures. In this case, it appears that the lower patio is extended 2 to 3 metres beyond the original development line and into the channel of the river. The patio has already started to be undermined. So, having assessed the proposal in the light of PPW and policy NE1 of the local development plan, we would therefore recommend the proposal is refused for the reasons set out on page 58. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And the local member, is he here? Tudor? Was coming in online. Oh, here he is. Councillor Thomas, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Certainly, I was on site yesterday, but I've been there before with the applicant. My understanding is that there will be remedial work to mitigate the erosion of the bank, that large boulders will be put down, and then that will be built up with soil, etc. And that in the fullness of time, there will be a natural pathway for reptiles and small animals along the river bank. And obviously that damage was caused during a very violent storm, and it has undermined that. In my understanding from speaking to the applicant, that was nothing to do with the work that he did in putting in extending the patio down. Mr. Burrows didn't realise that he'd encroached onto the sort of riparian area of the land on the river edge, and he owned it, and he believed he could extend, so he did it in all good faith, and it wasn't that he was sort of doing it, as it were, illegally. He's been very open and honest with the planning department, and in particular with the enforcement officers, for this really what appears to be to a layman like myself quite a small development, and there's certainly been no objections from anybody living in the area. It is a patio, it is an Airbnb, and in my mind, he's taken steps now, or will take steps to stop the erosion, build the bank back up, and then there will be sort of riparian access for lizards, etc., and reptiles to travel along that bank. So personally, I would support his application for leaving the patio down as it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. We've got the applicant now, Jeff Burrows, who, Jeff, you've got 4 minutes.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for allowing me to speak today and for attending Waterside, you guys, on Monday morning. I think I'm having a Harry Kane moment here, so please bear with me. So I'm grateful that my application is now with you, and I acknowledge the comments that Philip has made in respect of the issues that the officers noted regarding riparian access and the various aspects of the grounds therein. Both reports, though, refer to an extension of 2 to 3 metres, implying that the entire lower level is newly constructed, but this is incorrect. As set out in my own submission, the actual extension measures just over a metre, in fact just 1.2 metres. You saw the photographs of this site from some years ago. My understanding is it extends much further beyond that, and the work that I carried out in renovating the whole area was a net increase of just 1.2 metres, which was described by the calculating the slabs from the old ones to the new ones that are now in place. And this amount of paving originally extended right back to when the property was built in 1985. Concerns have also been raised regarding loss of riparian access for wildlife. I want to emphasise that the change in the riverbank condition was not caused by the small paved extension, but came as a consequence of that dreadful night last November when Storm Claudia struck Abergavenny and Monmouth, when a substantial 4-metre section of the bank was physically swept away. This event was unprecedented for us in the 23 years that we've owned 8 Waterside. The paved area and its underlying hardcore now form the only stable upper surface preventing further slippage. Removing it along with the hardcore beneath would expose loose saturated soil and significantly increase the risk of accelerated erosion during future storms. This would allow more sediment to enter the watercourse, causing greater ecological harm than leaving the structure in place. Permanent retention of this modest extension enables a controlled, engineered approach to stabilising the bank. I'm fully committed to delivering green engineered restoration, including willow planting and reinstatement of natural riparian margin. These measures will enhance, not reduce, the wildlife access and are fully aligned to the Planning Policy Wales biodiversity and climate resilience principles, as well as the local development plan's requirements for just proportionate domestic curtilage development. It's my understanding that during the consultation period, no objections were received in respect of this application. Indeed, the River Authority, Natural Resource Wales, were formally consulted on the extended patio and raised no objections to it, confirming that the development did not present concerns in relation to flood risk, ecology, or protected habitats. Their position supports the conclusion that the extension is environmentally acceptable and that the focus should now be on stabilisation and ecological development and improvement. I'd highlight 3 key points. The extension is small, proportionate to the long-established layout, and will be unobtrusive once restoration works are complete.
You've got 30 seconds.
Okay. It lies entirely within the domestic curtilage of the property. Retention is less harmful to the river environment than removal, given the current unstable condition of the bank following storm damage. My aim is to restore a stable, natural river margin that supports wildlife while protecting the bank for the long term. In short, I'm asking the committee to support a pragmatic, environmentally responsible and proportionate outcome to allow the small extension to remain permanently, enabling comprehensive policy line stabilisation and ecological improvement to the affected riverbank. In closing, I want to reassure the committee I'm fully committed to developing the stabilisation and ecological restoration that this bank urgently needs. And I've already taken professional advice and begun planning the green engineered scheme that's going to necessitate that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for that. Phil, do you want to come back in, or do you want Kate or Jay?
Just a couple of minor points. I think members have got to sort of disregard the, it may be laudable what the applicant wants to do in terms of restoration of the riverbank, but that needs separate planning permission as an engineering operation. So the applicant would need to come to us as well as NRW to discuss that, and we'd have to look at the acceptability of that at the time. It's also, we're pretty clear from a planning perspective that the original curtilage didn't extend out that far. So the original patio extended somewhat out beyond the original curtilage, and this has gone even further, which is why it's a change of use application. So the land may be owned by the applicant, but it doesn't mean to say it can be used as curtilage. It was riverbank, so hence why this planning application is with us. And if my colleagues here in front have got any further comments to make. I think we tend to think it is more than 1.2 metres. I think the slabs were of a different size originally. I think these are wider. But I don't know if James has got any comments on that. Thank you.
James, do you want to come in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, my comments aren't so much about the exact extension, but more about these engineering works next to and in the channel of rivers. Unfortunately, we find that they almost all get undermined over time. We have lots of areas in Monmouthshire where developments have, in a well-meaning fashion, just pushed closer and closer into the watercourse. They all end up falling down like this. I saw the photographs of the top of a patio at first, and it immediately made me think, what's happened underneath? And when I came to have a look, what was going underneath was exactly what I expected. All our structures over time, and sadly, very short amount of time, fall to these watercourses. We find it with our highways. We certainly find it on domestic structures. If you allowed this one to stay in place, one of the concerns would be, will the neighbours do the same, the next neighbour, the next neighbour? And we can look through places like Raglan where we have the watercourses, which, you know, are effectively walled off. And probably each one of those neighbours, as their structures start to decay and be undermined by the watercourses, wishes that they didn't have that structure there. So my advice really is that this isn't an appropriate structure to be in a watercourse, and the best way to look after the watercourse is to step back from it. I think the green engineering reparations will still be required, but everything should be set back from the river as it was previously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Stinchcombe, the Green Infrastructure and Nature Recovery Manager. I just wanted to make a small point about NRW's comments. NRW have a very specific checklist for when they respond to planning applications, and they don't comment on locally designated sites and the ecological value of locally designated sites. That's for us to consider as the local authority, as the sort of the county importance of that. So that might be why they didn't raise any concern relating to the River Gavenny site of importance for nature conservation.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you want to come back in now, Phil, or should I go to Councillor Payne?
No. Sorry, by all means, go out to the members now. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Payne.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. The application states that the site is not at risk of flooding and that protected and priority species, together with important habitats, will not be adversely affected either within the application site or on adjacent land. However, this appears to conflict with the evidence and concerns raised by both the Biodiversity Officer and NRW. Is that a correct interpretation? The development appears to have resulted in a reduction of the stream channel, which is likely to alter water behaviour by increasing flow velocity within this section of the watercourse. There also appears to be a loss of riparian vegetation along the riverbank, directly impacting the wildlife corridor associated with the sink. Given these concerns and with the apparent conflict between the submitted information and the expert advice received, I struggle to see how there could be sufficient grounds to support anything other than a refusal of this application. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Kate, do you want to come back on any of that?
The only thing to say really is that we don't have that ecological baseline, and we don't have the green infrastructure statement to accompany the application. We have that statement of what's it called, Phil? Like a design and access statement the statement of support or whatever has been provided. So there hasn't been that sort of ecological baseline undertaken for us to kind of look at what it was like before and what it was like now.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, the illustration of the storm damage to the River Gavenny and the undermining of the inappropriate development of the patio could not be a clearer illustration of what not to do on a riverbank. I don't quite know what the fact that it's an Airbnb has got to do with the price of eggs. I think it's so obvious that the natural habitat of the Gavenny has been undermined by this patio development, and in no shape or form should it be allowed to be given permission. I completely agree with what the officers have said, and it is a prime example of what not to do by a riverbank. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Anybody else want to contribute on this? I've got nobody else. Right. Okay, in that case, then we will look for somebody prepared to support the officer's recommendation, and that's Councillor Bryn. Is anybody prepared to second that? Councillor Crook?
I am.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Buckler. Councillor Crook got in front of you. In that case, then, Richard, can we go to the vote, please? So a vote for yes will be to refuse, no would be to approve.
All the votes are next year.
Okay, yeah.
So the application has been refused in accordance with the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. We can now go to 4.1 on the agenda, which is DM 2022-01398. Thanks, James and Kate. And that's Phil. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Are you after me?
No, we're just... Do I need to unplug and plug back in?
Oh, you are there.
Thank you, members. Okay, so this is an application, slightly unusual one, that you don't normally get these sort of applications, but it's to discharge elements or obligations within a Section 106 agreement. And the reason this is before you is because the original Section 106 would have been agreed by members many moons ago, which is why it's back before Planning Committee now to endorse any change. So this application is at Lower Chepstow. It's the old Osborne International site in Lower Chepstow. It covers 2.4 hectares, and it did have a large factory on it. But as members who are familiar with that site will know, they've been building houses on here. It's a mixed-use development. Originally granted for 169 dwellings, B1 office space, an A3 cafe, and associated public open space parking infrastructure. And that was subject to a legal agreement, Section 106. The heads of terms were as follows. 1, the construction work shall be carried out in accordance with the River Wye SAC mitigation and avoidance measures statement. 2, the owner shall agree with the council scheme to deliver economic infrastructure on the adjacent Fairfield Maybe site, equating to 200,000 of investment payment. and that 20% of the dwellings should be affordable, that these should be delivered prior to the occupation of 80% of the market housing. And please note this was approved under the old Monmouthshire Unitary Development Plan, where the residential schemes required a maximum provision of 20% of the total number of homes to be affordable. And then lastly, the last obligation was the owner shall, within 4 years of the date of commencement, construct a road for adoption by the council to the boundary of the land, with the land ownership of Network Rail being 6 metres wide. And eventually that would link up then with the Fairfield Maybe site. Development on the site is commenced, and in October 2022, a non-material amendment was granted in relation to some plot substitutions on the site, resulting in some of the affordable housing being moved, but this didn't alter the number of affordable houses, affordable housing units being proposed and approved. So that non-material amendment application sought amendment to substitute some plots in the central part of the development site. So I'll just show you the plan there. So that was the original layout, and then that was the revised layout, where with the affordable houses shown in sort of red colour. So the current obligation seeks to modify or discharge some of the Section 106 planning obligations. And as a result of the non-material amendment, the location of the affordable housing units has changed. The affordable housing plan annexed to the Section 106 needs to be altered to reflect this change, and the overall number of affordable housing units to be delivered and the exact mix remains unchanged at 34 units, as is shown on the revised plan. The road extending up to the boundary of the Network Rail land has now been delivered to an adoptable standard, and so that obligation can be removed from the agreement. And the clause requiring a financial contribution to deliver economic infrastructure on the adjacent Maybe Bridge site is proposed to be removed from the agreement. The financial contribution to deliver economic infrastructure on the adjacent Maybe Bridge redevelopment was intended to be used on the associated commercial land on the northern part of the Maybe Bridge site. And indeed, that's where the outline permission identified that land on the northern part of the Maybe Bridge site. So that land was then marketed. It was 1.378 acres. And was to be the location for an office and workshop-based scheme. And following an extensive and lengthy marketing exercise by the applicants at Maybe Bridge, it was established that there was no demand for commercial activity on the site. And this was vigorously tested by the local planning authority at the time. So as a result of that, a reserve matters planning permission and a 2024 application was submitted for 46 affordable residential units to be built in place of the commercial units, and that application was approved by Planning Committee in March 2025. And construction of the affordable homes on that site is well underway, with occupation of part of it targeted for July and August of this year. Thus, there's nowhere else on the Maybe Bridge site that is allocated or can provide that commercial activity which the delivery of economic infrastructure sought to provide within this 106. And given that the financial contribution could not be spent in accordance with the wording in the Section 106 agreement, that obligation should also be removed from the agreement. We'd recommend approval of this application. And in terms of the Section 106 agreement, the affordable housing plan should be updated so that the updated plan is annexed to the Section 106 agreement. The clause requiring the road to extend up to the site boundary should be removed, as that's been provided to adoptable standards. And that clause requiring a financial contribution to deliver economic infrastructure on the adjacent Maybe Bridge site can be removed from the agreement, as that element can no longer be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And has anybody got any points to raise? I think the presentation is quite straightforward. So can we go to a vote, Richard? Dale, just spotted you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to propose that we accept the recommendation and go to a vote, but you beat me to it.
Trying to speed up the meeting, Councillor. Okay, we'll go to the vote now. Then can. Oh yes, Councillor McConnell. Has everybody else managed to vote? My machine here has decided that it doesn't want me to.
You've had 13 in, Chair, so I'll
That'll do. That'll do.
So that's been approved.
The next one is DM 2024-01188, and that's Phil again.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so this application, you might recall we did visit this site visits some time ago, last year actually. Funny date, isn't it? 1st of April 2025 this was approved, so there's nothing foolish about it, however. So members accepted the recommendation for approval subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement requiring an off-site contribution towards affordable housing in the area. So so the western part of the site, as you can see on that plan, lies in a zone C1 flood zone. That's a defended zone, as referenced by technical advice note 15 on flood risk. The more recent flood map for planning identifies the site to be at risk of flooding within what we call Zone 3C. The application was accompanied by a flood consequences assessment, or FCA as I'll shorten it to, and plans showing the finished floor levels were submitted as part of that. And a condition was imposed on the draft decision that required no finished floor levels to be below the 1,000 a year coastal flood level of 11.16 metres AOD. So it was subsequently discovered that there were some inaccuracies in the submitted flood consequences assessment, and the existing finished floor level of both the shop and the residential property are in fact 9.76 and 9.79 metres respectively. And the proposed residential finished floor level will be the same level as the existing shop at 9.76. In the light of this, officers requested an amended flood consequences assessment and accompanying amended floor and site plans, and these were submitted and NRW were reconsulted. The ground floor flat that replaces an existing dormer bungalow, which you can see there on the left-hand side of the area edge red, is within the 1 in 1,000 year flood zone. The plans now show that there's a refuge area for the occupiers of this flat in the northwest corner of the garden. So if I go to that, I think that's showing it. Yeah, it's in. So if you look at that bottom left plan, it's in the extreme left, top left of that particular drawing, up some steps. So if there was ever an extreme 1 in 1,000 year event, which heaven forbid there will be, but there would be a refuge area for the relatively short time when those properties will be flooded before the water recedes back to the Severn, and it's available to them. It is a 1 in 1,000 year flood event, I would hasten to add, so that's an extreme event. So the proposal, in all other respects, is acceptable. NRW, on balance, haven't objected to this. The amended flood consequence assessment shows that the risks and consequences of flooding can be managed to an acceptable level. And for these reasons, it's considered that the proposal complies with all the tests set out in paragraph 6.2 of TAN 15 for highly vulnerable development within a CE1 flood zone. It's obviously already at risk as a vulnerable development as it sits, so this is not significantly increasing that risk. And it does provide a refuge area out of the floodplain. So the application is represented to members with amended plans, that amended flood consequences assessment, and the removal of that earlier condition referring to finished floor levels. The application is recommended for approval subject to those other conditions, all other conditions, and a Section 106 agreement to make that financial contribution towards affordable housing in the area. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And the local member is Councillor Dimmock, who I don't think is on the call. So, Councillor Rock.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this is a very sensible addition to the application, and as such, I would recommend it for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor McConnell. Seconded. In that case, if the technology will allow us, we'll. Oh, Councillor Bryn.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, is that usual for the refuge to be in a corner of a garden somewhere? Because there was a point that one made that they could possibly go to the top of the stairs within the flats and get refuse in there. I mean, if it's in a storm, I don't know if you'd want to be stood in the corner of the garden. Is that a common?
Not common. I think the problem is that there is a flat upstairs, so you'd be in literally a tiny landing area. So I don't think it was deemed as commodious an area as this. So it's highly unlikely it will be used within the lifetime of this development, being a 1 in 1,000 year flood, and a normal lifetime of planning development like this would be 100 years. So you can weigh up the risks as much as you want, really. So it isn't a normal sort of response, but occasionally, particularly for commercial properties, you will get these refuge areas outside and away from the building itself.
So in this corner, there's no planting. They're not going to be stood in a bush. It just seems a bit. It just seems kind of odd to me. And personally, I'd rather be stood on the top of a landing in the dry than stood in the bush in the corner. And a 1 in 1,000 event could happen tomorrow. It isn't going to necessarily happen in 1,000 years' time. It could happen next week.
It could do, but that you've got to balance that it is a 1 in 1,000 year risk. So yeah, I think there'll be enough advance warning, and if this property floods, the rest of that village will flood. So I think there'll be a lot of advance warning. People won't be in that area. Once they get advance warning, they'll be out of it. And I think this is just, I wouldn't say a tick box exercise, but it does feel a little bit like that. But it's actually providing evidence there is somewhere for them to go which won't flood.
Okay, thank you.
You wouldn't want to be anywhere in Sevenside when that happened. Be careful what you wish for, Councillor Byrne. I think we can probably go to the vote, Richard. Oh. All vote now then, please. Okay.
It's been approved.
That's it. Okay, lovely. In that case then, we'll go to the last item before us today, which is DM 2025-01039, and that's Phil again.
Yes, thank you, members. I'll just go back with the slideshow again. Slide. Yeah, so this is a repeat of where we were last time. It was one we visited, some of us visited on site. So it was presented to committee on the 2nd of June with an officer recommendation for approval. Members resolved to defer the application to be refused, and a reason for refusal was set out in the report and is set out in the report for members' further consideration. So I won't read that out, but it relates to, in summary, development being contrary to Monmouthshire LDP policy DES 1A, and members are invited to reconsider the application accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Does anybody want to contribute to last chance? Okay, in that case then, we looked at this last time. We approved 2 of the sites, but decided that this site wasn't appropriate. So what we've been now asked to do is to confirm or otherwise that decision. So can somebody propose that we, thank you Councillor McConnell and Councillor Bryn. In that case we can go to the vote, Richard. Can you vote now then, please? Yeah, well, that's...
yeah, that's been refused.
Okay, that's the last item coming before us today, but it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge the fact that this is Phil's last meeting due to his impending retirement, and I think all of us will want to wish Phil well in his